We want to reflect what makes certain places feel special, significant, and remarkable to all of us. We have a bunch of amazing speakers here, as well as our moderator, Alexey Afanasyev, whom you've heard at the very first session. And I guess I'm going to give a word to you to proceed with the introductory.
Okay.
With the introductory.
Okay, that's a good one.
Oh,
One, two, one, two. It's 1, 2. Sorry. All right. So thank you so much for staying late for this session. I'm very excited to see that you guys are still awake. So we'll try to make this as open and collaborative, to have an open discussion for everyone. I think we'll open audience to also share their views. But I think rather than me reading all your guys' biographies, let me just, I guess, open the floor to each and everyone to speak a few words of yourself. So I'll start with Aida, I guess, if you just can make a little introduction. I mean, do you want me to speak again about myself? I think you've heard me talking a lot this morning. So again, my name is Alexey Afanasyev. I'm a cultural advisor based in Dubai. Had 15 years living here, and very happy to be talking with everyone. So Aida, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Aida Balaš. I'm Business Development Director for 100 Architects, global company doing street architecture, urban interventions, and mega events.
Hello, pleasure to be here. I'm Tala Gharagozlou. I'm project manager for design and building for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project, and also recently co-creator of Liminal Urbanism Research Group with dear colleagues at NYU Abu Dhabi.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hessa Alghandi. I'm an Emirati designer and artist. I'm the founder of Hessa Archives. I also work as an interior designer at Warner Falassi Architects. I like to transport all of my Emirati heritage and knowledge into my designs, and I think that's what I'm most known for.
Hello, my name is Silvia, and together with my partner Alex, we are behind Abu Dhabi Streets photography blog. We are capturing the unseen part of Abu Dhabi.
Thank you, Silvia. I'm Alex, and I'm a photographer.
And yeah, very elegant. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions. I think it's great to see that we have very different backgrounds and points of view, I guess. I hope it's going to be a very collaborative conversation. And on this note, I think, as our talk today is about placemaking, and placemaking always requires a number of diverse experiences, points of view, especially in a place like Dubai and the United Arab Emirates at large, where there are so many different communities and different needs for the different, people who live here. And so here comes my question: what, in your point of view, are the key elements of this effective collaboration between architects, designers, artists, community members, as well as local authorities? Like, what is the best practice that you've witnessed through your own experience, or perhaps saw elsewhere? We'll do the same order as we do the introduction, unless anyone wants to cut the line first.
Often placemaking is seen like a community-driven process, but as per our experience, usually people do not know what they want. And this is where architects, designers, and artists play a very important role to envision this for the people so they can experience it. Once they experience it, then they can recognize if they want it in the public space or not. Of course, local authorities are playing a crucial role without funding, without long planning, without, I mean, everything needs to be done through the local authorities. Doesn't matter how creative the project is, if you don't have good collaboration with the local authorities, it will not be built. So this is the most important part of the game.
All right, Tala, what's your thought on this?
I think that's an interesting question because, and in your comment is a very interesting one, Aida, because for me, what I didn't present is that actually I was trained as an architect, was a practicing architect, and started my career at Frank Gehry's office in LA. And so it was particularly interesting to come here at a very different stage in my career because that was about 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, when I was all the way in LA, I was not working on the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, I was working on another project. And I looked at aerial photos of Saadiyat. I thought this project is delirious, like what many of us thought about when we were very far away. And so, life has its own sort of set of circumstances, and I would have never guessed I would have ended up in Abu Dhabi. And so, on a very personal level, that was one of the first questions for myself, was like, how will I make this place feel personal, feel mine? I was much more familiar with other Arab cities. The Gulf was not very familiar to me. Other Arab modernist heritage across the region, Turkey, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, were very familiar places. And so there was a very clear moment of feeling very alienated and disjunction. And so I do think we do have to acknowledge that at times there's that sense of excitement from the spectacle that both, cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi offer versus what it feels like for many of us when you first land here. And I think that's where it's actually interesting to look at what is, often when people ask me, what is it like? Oh, it must feel like an amazing playground to be an architect here.
Yeah, but it's also a complete black canvas, I guess, in a way, right?
Well, that's what people say, but I like to say, well, it has really made me rethink the role of my profession. How much of it is it about design versus how much of it is about a whole set of factors that are totally beyond our control? As Aida said, what is a municipality's desire? What is a developer's desire? Whether in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, the role of local authorities versus local developers, all those things, you see all those parameters at work and their realization come to life very quickly. And so I don't want to take up too much time because I'd love to hear back from the esteemed people on this panel as well. But for me, I think the two interesting case studies has always been to think, on one hand, if we think of Abu Dhabi, looking at the incredible efforts to master plan downtown Abu Dhabi versus this radical break that the 2010 Corniche project brought, and then thinking again of this insanely rapid era of creating Abu Dhabi Inc. on Saadiyat. And so that, for me, is interesting to think of these moments of rupture where there's very much a clear modernist heritage, a very clear mindset in terms of master planning city, creating mixed-use spaces, and how even with the best of design, gets transformed by certain economic impetuses. And then on the other hand, for me, I don't want to necessarily glorify over-romanticize the community-driven or grassroots, but I think on the other hand, it's also interesting, if we're in Dubai, to think comparatively about areas that probably most of us are very familiar. If you compare the court in Al-Quoz, if you compare the courtyard versus Al-Serkal, versus the rest of the things that are happening within Al-Quoz, of course, which In Loco is part of. So it's interesting to think, if we think of these two cities, of these kind of interesting, whether private, commercial, public, how every time you could see that each one in those specific areas, there was a very specific impetus and created a very specific sociocultural and economic system of its own each time. And so I would say it's very interesting to see that in each one, it's a combination of many factors that end up creating that place ultimately.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the expansive overview. Hessa, I think your point of view can be more sort of artistic in this sense, because we touched on, architects and kind of city planners and designers, but the role of artists here, I guess, is significant.
Yeah. I think continuing on that, I think the land it's based on and the project where it's being built upon, that's where the inspiration lies. It's within the ground, it's within the people who have use the ground, to actually take advantage of the space, the history that it's, been part of. I think these are crucial elements that allow design to be quite meaningful. Collaboration can be not in just terms of architects or designers, but also, for example, a person who I always use, my grandmother. Some people who are part of our daily lives can be really pivotal, factors for inspiration when it comes to design and creating something meaningful that relates to the ground. So I think that is one node of collaboration that I always look at. And I always look at collaboration as I'm one piece of the puzzle. The more I talk to people, they complete the puzzle, and that's how the picture becomes even bigger and clearer. So in order to have that meaningfulness, you tie it in with storytelling and you tie it in with the land it's being part of.
I really like the puzzle
The
idea.
invisible string
exactly.
theory.
I mean, some pieces are slightly larger than the others, but you cannot complete it without actually having each and every one. Sylvia?
Do you have a question in particular?
I mean, just,
should
continue these thoughts, and I think with you guys really kind of documenting the whole process, I think we can have a specific understanding, especially in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I think a successful placemaking project will involve understanding the cities are different, and what Dubai might be okay for Dubai, it will not match with something in Abu Dhabi, for example. And you really need to go there, see what is around that field where you're, that situ that you're going to build, and understand the vibe of the place, understand what those people need, and how you can integrate nicely, smooth in their daily life without breaking their activities, which, like in Abu Dhabi, you will walk and see a lot of quiet streets, so definitely you can't go there and build a skyscraper. So yeah, we need to be culturally sensitive.
Thank you. So you asked the question, what's required to move this agenda forward. So for one, this is what we're doing now. Come and talk, communicate. I think communication is very important. And a particular point I want to raise, like the previous speaker mentioned, that while there are some things which are very much in common between geographies, and in the end of the day, we're all humans. We have our basic needs, our families. We all live in our environments. At the same time, there are some particular things, some particular sentiments, and I want to touch upon the subject of bringing in the residents, you can call it differently, people's voice in the end of the day, right? I'm a little familiar with the design thinking approach. If you look at design thinking, and I think this is very much in line with, again, what other esteemed speakers said, you want to understand your audience first. You want to understand the problem first before offering some solution. I think Einstein once said, right, that he would spend, given the problem, he would spend 95% of time understanding the problem and 5% on crafting the solution. So if we bring it back to design domain, design thinking as approach and a framework starts from empathizing, which in more common terms means understanding what people want, and then crafting the solution. So really want to leave you with this one thought that, while there are many actors involved, definitely these processes need to happen, need to have executive support, government support, funding. This is very vibrant, say, ecosystem in terms of who is building, what is building, and when we're speaking of placemaking, we eventually speak of physical spaces, right? We're speaking of communal spaces, right. And there are many actors at play. You look at big developers, you look at private companies, you look at residents, you look at artists, you look at architects, members of community. So I feel that some dialogue between all these various parties, understanding and free flow of communication will eventually lead to the hopefully better outcomes for everyone.
Thank you so much for this. We started talking a little bit about the role of art, and I think I would like to focus this question solely about the role of art in public spaces. I think we've all seen good examples and bad examples from different places in the world when we travel, but then also when we're back home. I was very excited, and I still am, about the first public art biennale that just opened in Abu Dhabi. I'm sure you guys have some thoughts about that. So I guess, yeah, just thinking about, when we travel, what makes us feel home, or when we're home, what makes us feel really home, specifically when it comes in our kind of conversations or our engagement with the pieces of art that we see in public spaces. I mean, I can give free order now to speak. I guess I would like to start with those in Abu Dhabi. I guess Tala, Sylvia, Alex, please share your thoughts.
I mean, it's very interesting because the way art has played such an important role in the last 15 years in the public and global image of both, Sharjah, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi is actually fascinating. And there are three very different case studies. And so that's why I'll come back to Abu Dhabi. And for me, it was interesting that, for example, as a newcomer, my first magnet was Al Sirkal. But actually, it took me a while to even realize the courtyard had actually the alleyway had been there for much longer.
Right.
And it was kind of interesting that just crossing that street was something that had not happened because, within my global network of art people, my first meeting point was Al Sirkal. So, obviously, I'm a lover of the arts. I do think those projects bring together and the best artists make you think critically, make you rethink the world. But I'm always also mindful to think, art can take such a visible space. And so when art suddenly becomes the focus of everything, how much of that really, the people's needs, or what really happens naturally on the ground, are we masking or are we losing out on?
Yeah.
So that's a word of caution, I would say, because this is not to undermine the huge cultural projects that are happening, but for me, looking at the massive scale of the museum projects, obviously I'm part of the Guggenheim, but for me, I think people always talk about the Bilbao effect with the Guggenheim. But as we've been working, and you are within DCT and looking at what does it mean to build an institution, I think the most interesting thing for me professionally was when we went to Bilbao and we realized actually the enduring success of Bilbao, of course the architecture played a huge part, of course bringing this huge artist commission, but it's the fact that at the time the region was in such crisis that they had to train everyone. No one would even come from Madrid to actually work in that museum. So it's the fact that they had to train everyone locally, and that's why everyone felt invested in that project. So, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of these big cyclical events, Sharjah Biennale, Public Art Biennale, but for me, I think the most interesting part is what is the real institutional building you do on the long term, because people feel they really have skin in the game, and actually, it won't be just about the one art piece, it'll be about the long-term relationship with the institution and with their respective community. As Hessa says, it's when you bring someone and suddenly you train someone with a new set of skills in a new institution, but then with them, they bring everyone else around them, their whole ecosystem, their parents, their cousins, their grandmother. And that's, to me, the most interesting part of what art institutions and cultural institutions can do in a place.
Thank you.
Well, it's a hard pass. So maybe I will talk about public art happening now in Abu Dhabi, which I think is a nice way to introduce art to people and prepare them for Guggenheim, prepare them for other modern art which will come in the region. So it's there, it's in the public, common people can access it, have an idea of the challenges of it, like you need to think a little bit what is this, what does it mean, and I think it's very educational, and it's a really good step to start building this market, not in a sense of economy, but market for people who will come and visit the museums. Actually, local people.
Right.
Or
So
expats, or
you see like art being placed in public as a link with those institutions, museums that are being built to bring awareness. That's a good actually angle to think of that. And to be fair, I mean, as I was working with Al-Serkal for many years, and while there was a certain circle of art specialists or like art lovers who were aware, so many people you would have to explain what it actually means, what the gallery stands for, what a non-profit space, why are collectors important, you know, how do these galleries survive financially? All these topics are really relevant, but I would agree actually with your point, Sylvia, that having a piece of art placed in the public, it makes you wonder, because also, I guess the spaces for museums and institutions always tend to feel a little intimidating, especially if you're coming from less privileged societies or less educated, but you still want to wander around. So back to my kind of experience with Al-Serkal, the way we tackled it as we really opened the space for various different communities, and we were looking at concerts outdoors, bringing also musicians from different backgrounds and you know, different genres, more with folk music as well, and that really kind of connects on an easier level, and then you get to experience more and more. So I guess, yeah, you need to place those little hints in the public space to be able to invite people to experience more, I guess, right? What's your thought?
I agree. My team usually use very artistic approach and using art itself in a very visually strong manners, very colorful. But at the same time, it needs to be functional. It needs to be for people. And in many ways, we tend to. This is some of the examples. Now you can see this is hub in Marassi. So you can see attention is to be artistic.
I'm sorry, where is this again?
This is the hub project in Marassi. So, yes, this is real. No, this is, I will go back. Let me just see how I use this. Yes, this is real. And it is just recently, beginning of the year, open in Egypt, in Marassi, with developer of MR. And it is really strong and visually appealing, but at the same time, each of these components are having a function. So it is not only art, but at the same time, it needs to be for people. This is some of the examples where you can see art, but at the same time, each one of them is inviting you.
Very playful, yeah.
Yes, and we also think the playgrounds are not only for kids. We want everyone to play. We want adults to play.
The world is a playground, right?
Yeah, the city is the playground, but you just need to discover which way everyone wants to play. And this is the way that we can interact, we can connect. Now, these days, we are all overstimulated with the phones, with the social media, and we do not interact with each other. This kind of places that we create in our studio are reflection and inviting people to interact, to play. When you see me playing, you will start smiling at me and you will start talking to me and you ask me what you are doing. Like, and we tend to create, like this is example where this was a rooftop of a shopping mall where there was nothing, AC units, machinery, nothing is there. Of course, we tend also to make it commercial. That way is sustainable, and that way also brings people there and people stay. And it is a commercial part and public part needs to be hand in hand together. So this is some of the examples I just wanted to share because it is very hard to explain these colors with their words, right?
Yeah. I guess my point there that I would like to add is that, especially when thinking of master planned districts or master planned cities like Saadiyat, like the area that we're looking at now, it always looks great in the render. It always looks great from top down, but we don't fly on helicopters on a daily basis. So what is really important is actually to look at these master plans from bottom up, right? So actually imagining yourself being there. So it's very important as you're highlighting those playful areas and kind of trying to place yourself in those master plans first. That's just a comment.
Yes, we use color to create circulation. So circulation is leading you to play, and we have. It depends on from the project to the project. Of course, now I'm presenting something that is playground, but at the same time, when it comes to the master planning, you need to define circulation, and then it is again playground.
Exactly. Okay, great.
The thing is, master planning is always a very exciting exercise, and as I said, many designers like having a blank canvas, but I do think in our daily life, most of us want, at some point, end up looking for a feeling of being rooted, or what makes a place unique and like no other. So I do think that's always been, the real crux of the issue, because the scale, the sophistication of developments that you see here in the region are always absolutely amazing. But as Laure pointed out, it's like things get commodified at a speed that is quite spectacular as well, and frankly a little scary. So even when we talk about art, at what point is there space for things to stay critical, to stay weird, or to just be a bit scrappy and local? And so I would say, just for me, as a person who had sort of number of artists in my life, that's, sometimes you want to feel like that's when I was really seeking out who are the Emirati friends, a bit like Laure was explaining earlier in her talk, where showing sort of people are looking for traces of 90s Abu Dhabi. Why does a young generation of Emirati artists look for that and try to revive that? Because those are the things that they saw nowhere else in the world. And that was their definition of home. On the other hand, of course, I'm saying, we should be wary of this commodification. There's also the fact that, on the other hand, when I'm not an architect, I'm a mom, and the places that make my life easy, where the kids can play, and there's enough shading and a combination of like a good place to get a drink, I won't deny those are the places that make my life easy. But I do think it's that balance between all those things that's really, for me, for example, a really interesting place is the archaeological center, visitor center at Meleha in Sharjah. Because for me, that's really that interesting, subtle balance between a place that's where I, as the parent, feel like I'm there to learn something. The design is honestly quite superb. Soumaya Al-Dabbagh is a fabulous architect. And really, there's enough spaces that feel open-ended and that don't feel so prescribed. And I think sometimes that's the risk we run into, because we live in a place of abundance, and we're very lucky for that. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely blessed.
That's not the case of whether in Euro-America or the rest of the world. That is very rare in the world today, to be in a place of such abundance. But for things to also not be over-designed and open for interpretation, that I would say would be my definition of good design, and a place that I would feel comfortable in.
I just want to add one quick thing.
Thank you.
I went to a summit recently where it was about public art and cities. And we think about Paris, and we think about Barcelona, and we think about all these different cities, and what we think about is that they have their own distinct style. And that's all thanks to creatives and artisans and architects, and those cities allowing those artists to express themselves in relation to their land. I think this is something that here in the UAE we started, but we also experimented, and we're still experimenting, but we have some places that actually are a reflection of our land, and some places that take the reflection like Meleha and actually extend it to today's world. So I think that's something that's quite strong in cities or the places that we're in today.
Exactly. No, thank you so much for this comment. And actually, as we were chatting earlier, and generally, like many people I'm talking to when it comes to, places where we feel home or places where we feel belonging. I spent some time of my life living in Venice, and so with Hessa, we were discussing, Hessa was working with the UA Pavilion in Venice last year, right? And there is this unbeatable sense of belonging when you're there, although it feels very foreign, the language is different, everyone is a tourist, the schedule of going to all these museums and exhibitions and foundations is overwhelming, yet it suddenly feels so nice. I mean, maybe it's the absence of cars, but then we were discussing with Hessa about, being in Shindagha, the neighborhood where you would go as a child, and that has a similar feel to it. So I think there is a beautiful process of revitalization of these older spaces like Shindagha with a museum that has been opened a few years back, but it managed to keep its identity. But more than that, I don't know if you guys been to Al Sif, which is like a completely newly built neighborhood, right? So how many years? It was like 6 years ago, I guess it opened. And it already was meant to look like it's a little old, but surprisingly, I revisited recently and it felt like it's true. It felt like it's always been that way. And, walking on those streets, especially by night when all the shops are closed, it almost feels like you're walking in Venice in a way.
Almost.
Yeah.
I believe these old cities in Europe, they have such a rich history, and there are layers and layers of culture, heritage, and just history that you cannot build. This is something that is like years, and these public spaces in these old cities, for example, in Europe, I'm from Europe, they are created by the people, by the function, by needs of these areas, and they reflect so beautifully the people that live there. For instance, now, like the cities like Dubai, or cities like now new cities that you have in Saudi Arabia, you have great challenge for these public spaces. You can start building. You have a challenge to build it from zero, and but there is a thin layer designing these public spaces in new development. Lack of identity. You need to be very careful and decide which way to develop and how to create this bold identity that will reflect us history, culture, and it will be accepted by the people, and it will be used by people, not just aesthetically.
Not in the first few decades, I guess, right? It needs time. I think I would like to, first of all, agree to disagree on this, because all of these places we refer to, especially in the old world, were also built some time ago, right? They were also new. I mean, from kind of looking at the history of where I'm from in Russia, the new city of St. Petersburg was built on an empty land. And when the royal collection was being formed with all the masterpieces, which are now has the Hermitage Museum, right? And now we compare it to one of the greatest museums in the world, of course. But 300 years ago, all these cultural leaders of Western Europe were saying, "Are you guys crazy? You're giving this to these barbarians in Russia in this empty land?"
I'd like to add to this.
Yeah.
Your question was, how can art help the sense of belonging and someone feel at home? Yeah, I think in this phrase, there's only one word missing, which is culture, to make it perfect trio of very broad and very complex matters. What is home? What is art? And eventually, what's culture? So again, you give me a little bit hard task as I'm speaking after everyone, so I'll try to maybe add my perspective, but also summarize it a bit and try not to get lost in thoughts. So we spoke about public art, and we spoke about home and belonging. So, many examples come to mind. The person from Lebanon who lives in Manama, where is their home? Is it what they call home? Is it where they feel at home? And coming back, what makes the person feel the way they feel? So, of course, I think art can play one role in whichever way we define, in whichever shape and form, institutional or public, and I will speak about public art in a bit. But eventually, it's our emotion, it's our private sentiment. So coming back to what I said earlier about understanding what people want, understanding each other, understanding what drives us, understanding our stories. Public art, how can that help that? So I think we interact, again, we do not exist yet in metaverse, so we operate and interact in a physical environment, okay, as much as in Instagrams and Facebooks and what else of the world, but we are influenced by the built environment, and this is undeniable. Yeah, we have all our preferences, likes and dislikes. You mentioned St. Petersburg, Russia, or that part of the world. Say such architectural styles. Modernism was mentioned. You think brutalism. If anyone has the reference in mind about brutalism, I think it evokes strong emotional response. You may love it and become a fan. You may hate it. Yeah, it's hard to miss. But all of us will have our kind of own thoughts and preferences. But my point was that the environment we interact with definitely affects us and affects that sense of belonging. So now to public art, as we have mentioned that there's a inaugural public art biennial happening now in Abu Dhabi. It's already on till end of April. And here I want to take a small pause and actually make a small experiment. Ask if you can raise hands if anyone who is aware of this, and if anyone has any art installations in Abu Dhabi which are public art. Anyone has seen any of this? Or so perhaps Hessa, if you can share your artistic view, just hands-on experience really. What was the artwork you visited and what you felt about it?
Well, I visited virtually. I haven't visited yet, but I've seen the works. And a lot of the works that I felt I connected mostly to were the works of an artist named Christopher, who created right?
I was about to actually bring that topic, yes.
That, for me, was amazing because he connected with people in Abu Dhabi, craftsmen, shared their story through carpet, through a big installation, something interactive, something that tells a story of Abu Dhabi and the people there, not only the natives.
I will interrupt you for a second. So Christopher Joshua Benton, he's an American artist living in Abu Dhabi, and he's been based in the UAE for quite a few years. But the installation that he created is, and I'm really encouraging you all to go. Also this week they still have some programming involved. I think the programming will go until April. So it's an old carpet market. And there was this big square that was in terrible condition, and his proposal was just to carpet that entire square. And the carpet has the motifs from these guys who are actually working on these markets, who are bringing these markets from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, and really, I think it was leading to my next question actually. How do you make sure these communities are being included, right, in the process? So yeah, just sorry to interrupt, but please continue.
No, I think definitely the way Christopher did it is a way to include people of the community, but also, as I mentioned before, I believe everyone is a creative, but everyone has different tools, so each tool you have kind of accesses a different point of how we can answer problems through design or reflect through design. And I think that the way that it's been done through public art actually allows and encourages people to ask more questions. What about the carpet market? Why is it in Abu Dhabi? And things like that actually help further educate people about, the UAE, but also through design.
Thank you so much, Hessa. So I'd like to give a couple of stories, as we have, that's probably one artwork we visited the most, as we are also Abu Dhabi-based family, and I think Tala said that, what is the place, good place for you is where you can sit comfortably, where kids can spend time. So, but before I give you stories, I just wanted to quickly pick on that thought about the temporary art installations, or, like you said, the city with the history and some place, physical place, which has been there for 300 years. You cannot replicate that. Yeah, we don't have time machine. So I think the thought I want to pass, I observed the other day, I was just taking photos of the family. Yeah, beautiful Indian family of a husband, wife, and a little child, playing and interacting with one of the artworks early in the morning on Corniche. And this was so heartwarming and so touching. And as we roam around city a lot, what we see is how people discover these new things. We've seen this with other landmarks. Hudayrat Bridge being built. The moment it's open, is like, we are, we're communal creatures in the end, right? We know, or someone went there, and everyone starts going. They start discovering this, and it's actually I want to. Say that what we observe is absolutely new. We love Louvre, we love all the museum and institutional arts and all the exhibitions, but here, firsthand, experiencing how, or rather observing how people discover and interact with this. And you can see at times even facial expressions from complete misunderstanding. What's that? Why is that? Asking questions, or bypassing, or just seeing someone else seeing these objects, to actually interacting with them. And what I wanted to say, I think that builds experience, right? And that creates some connection. And while I agree that you cannot replicate some fundamental physical place, but I think this kind of initiative cuts the nice balance, and like Sylvia said, introduces people to concept of contemporary modern art, and actually brings more than 70, 80 artists from all around the world, actually creating that exposure, cultural exposure to Abu Dhabi residents for the broader art scene. But then once these installations will be gone, right, those places will remain. So I feel these installations, if anything, they serve as, if you wish, kind of an anchor to people to have these emotionally significant experiences. And again, while all these artworks will be gone, some of them will turn into art spaces like bus terminal. Yeah, we have 64 modern heritage sites where, there are beautiful projects for future, functional repurposing and whatnot. But people perhaps will receive new experiences around Corniche, exploring parks, and just interacting with this urban environment. So again, I apologize if it's a little long, but I just wanted to convey this public kind of a perspective.
I mean, the one thing I would respond to that, it's, of course, it's obvious that that's the success of the Public Art Biennale is creating these anchor points, as you said. But I think the thing that I think is important to keep in mind, especially when certain European tropes come back to us about what Haussmannian or 18th century city planning, the kind of cohesion that created, and that's the charm that all of us love to romanticize. And it's kind of interesting to see that self-orientalizing move in a development like Madinat Jumeirah. That was kind of one of those first fascinating things. But I wouldn't say because it also says something about a time and a place, and that in itself is very evocative to me. But, the part where I still have mixed feelings is that, as Nelida pointed out, the car and the suburbanization of areas of Dubai and Abu Dhabi has created a fragmentation that I sadly believe that no amount of master planning can counteract that. And it's that difference of speed and scale of movement that each community, depending on their socioeconomic needs and socioeconomic abilities, has. And that's this kind of stratification of the way you experience the city based on Do you have a car? Do you have one car? Do you have two cars? Do you have access to taxis? Can you pay for a taxi? What does public transportation mean? And public transportation does exist across the Emirate, but we all use it in a very different way. And so for me, in many ways, when I moved here, I really tried to get out of this European tropism and really think, for example, of Los Angeles, because, for example, the architectural theorist Rainer Banham was the first one to talk about these 4 ecologies of architecture, about how the highway, the infrastructure of our lives actually has a much larger impact on how we experience those cities. And so to me, that was a very interesting one because, for example, in LA, my sister was a photographer, actually, was doing an internship at a great cultural institution, LACMA, and she would get very nicely dressed because she was, an assistant to a curator, but she didn't have a car. I needed my car to go to work. And she took the bus, and she photographed people on the bus. And so people would always taken aback, and what was she doing on the bus? Was she lost if she was walking? And so, fortunately, we don't have those kinds of extreme disjunctions, but I do say, and I do want to reiterate that in that moment of, the people whizzing by to work on the Corniche every morning, I'm not sure how many people, that's where social media plays a really interesting role, actually, because there's a whole community of us who actually build our awareness actually almost only or first and foremost through social media, because I can guarantee you that of all the people who are commuting to work on the Corniche, I frankly don't know what's the percentage that even know what the Public Art Biennale really is. I mean, they'll see the posters, but so that speed of the car, flattens things, that changes so many things. And so it's always finding that balance of why, as you said, so many of us still have this instinctive appeal for areas where you can walk. But again, you can walk around the IFC, but who are the people who can walk in the IFC? Exactly. And when art and sculpture is installed there, what does that mean? What kind of category of people, what type of people are allowed access to that?
Absolutely.
And what is being signaled there?
Just a small addition. I was really surprised when I woke up around 6 o'clock. If you go to Abu Dhabi Corniche, at that time, you'd be surprised how many people are already there. Of course, car, the faster the speed, the narrower the vision, right? It's known fact, right? The slower you go, the broader is your field of view. I don't know if a photographer here would second that. But yeah, so if the slower you go, bicycle, explore on foot, and it was so happening, we're amazed. So many people jogging, walking, and so the right is right there where people already are, just notion.
A similar situation you have on Creek Harbor, and there is interesting project that we did, and it is interesting solution, so I would like to share shortly. MR, on this Creek Harbor, they have construction site. Huge construction site. More than a kilometer on the area where people are walking, jogging, and they needed solution for the hoarding. I'm not sure, can I share example? But we designed this hoarding. Let me just try to show that one. This is the one. You have capsules, one next to each other, of course, in the style of using local elements. But I was with my son, and I wanted to see this project, and he was like, "Not going. It's boring. He don't want to walk." But then colors, and then he started using one capsule after another. It was very pleasant. It was beautiful, and this kind of problems, public problems, we can create in a very beautiful way and produce this kind of emotion that we have also signed where say, "I love UAE." This is a hot space for Instagram, for
yes,
TikTok.
I was about to say. Thank you. But I think I wanted to just rewind a little bit on the thoughts about being at the Creek Harbor, going for jogging or letting you walk around by Corniche. I think a lot of great example of public spaces also tend to do something with the nature, right? With green spaces, with something that's organic. I mean, obviously we I guess, subconsciously being kind of gravitated towards water when there's a water feature. And I guess there was a question about importance of nature in certain capacity, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, forests or fields of grass, because I mean we need to accept the reality. We're living in a place where these things are very high maintenance and high costs, but something as simple as a promenade on the beach, without actually a promenade by the water, of course, adds a different value to our public spaces. I guess we've answered this question already, because as you see, there's 0 seconds left on our timer, and I don't know if the audience is bored. I hope they're not. But unless there's any...
I can comment shortly. Like nature in this area is very important for the shading, for example.
Yeah,
we need to
exactly.
reduce temperature of the streets.
Yeah.
So just shortly to comment.
But also think that, we have half trees, I mean, also, I love being in a desert, and that's also nature, right? When you go to those open fields, it's just, you get that energy from the winds, from the heat. This is our nature. And I think we don't really need to always think, okay, we need to replicate the European city, and that's where people will feel comfortable. Not necessarily. Everyone has a different mentality and backgrounds. Of course, if some of us grew up in those small cities which are walkable, and we would naturally feel more comfort in such spaces, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, we're building our own reality here, and this is the beauty of it, that people on this panel actually tend to decide how we are going to live, and this is beautiful.
If I can add something quickly. You just made me remember, based on the research I've been conducting, collecting the memories of Shindagha, of our Shindagha home in Old Dubai through my grandmother, there was a talk about being so close with nature that they would shift in position during the winters and summers. So Shindagha is right by the water, so they'd have the cool breeze, but when it would get really hot, they'd actually go towards the mountains, or they'd go towards the desert, and that's them controlling their environment, but also accepting their environment they're in, and also allowing that element to shape the design of the places they're in. It was made out of arish, which is like palm trees, but also we were talking about green spaces. They made use of every single natural element we have on the ground. The palm tree was used in over 100 different ways that, unfortunately, throughout time, we started looking outwards instead of inwards, and we kind of disregarded the methodology that they, used. But I think it's quite interesting to go back to nature, go back to the water, go back to the land, but also remember what was once there, and then how can we bring that back to recognize the land, but also bring it back so it's even more functional today than it was back then.
Thank you. Shall we open the microphone for questions, please? Yeah.
Thank you very much. On Venice, which actually, in a sense, does give a lot of credit to the conversation about the ability of art, and public art or non-public art or whatever. It's all public anyway these days, even if it's not outside. In terms of kindling or rekindling sort of memories and attachments of place, because you, Alexei, said that you lived in Venice, and for you was a great experience, and you felt, I'm actually from Venice, and well, close to Venice, but I lived in Venice for a long time.
Nice.
In the 1980s, though. But when I go to Venice now, I'm horrified. There is nothing that will get me back there. I'm completely, I don't have this attachment to the art world because I'm not an artist. I'm just somebody who happened to live there and study there. This is an example of how your attachment to the art.
Definitely. Yeah.
But also the other thing about European cities, and I'm 100% European, but we tend to really, really kind of make them as a site of nostalgia, as a model. And actually, I agree with Alexei. St. Petersburg was a created city. You know, there are others in Europe that, you know, the idea of the spectacle I was discussing, the political spectacle in that case.
Yep.
So I think, you know, we should a bit sort of, I mean, I'm not a planner and I'm not an artist, but we should stop a bit romanticizing and you know, and I'm European, so I mean 100%. So and look at what there is here and what is specific.
Thank you.
So I really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you so much.
I have a bit of a provocative question or comment, because, and I know that's going to also contradict some of the things I said, or at least it's another side of it. But you've talked a lot about sort of outdoor spaces, green spaces, etc. But if we think about cities in the UAE, probably some of the most cosmopolitan spaces, actually, and diverse spaces in terms of social class, in terms of nationalities, etc., are, for example, the mall's food courts, yes. Right? It's one place where actually there's a huge diversity of populations. And another thing is, you know, I think there's also sort of, it's easy to dismiss the spectacle, but I think a lot of people also want a part of the spectacle, right? Or want to see one of the spaces that is actually the most appropriated in Abu Dhabi is the space at the end of the Qasr, the breakwater, behind the National Theatre, because you have a view of the entire skyline, right? And it's a place where people keep going. They were coming 20 years ago, and they keep coming there because you have a beautiful view of Abu Dhabi. And so, what do we make of that? You know, when we think about sort of making space, getting people to take part in the city and in the urban landscape, how do we still sort of integrate that spectacle, right, while keeping a critical eye on it?
I mean, yeah, I think, thank you for that comment, Laure, because I was talking about, I mean, our artists were my first, most interesting vantage points to these places when, before I managed to find Arab and Emirati friends who gave me access to other, so an artist like Farah Al-Qasimi was definitely one where it was interesting for me to see both the way she portrayed her friends in private homes, at the majlis or in their rooms, etc., places that I didn't know yet, but also actually her this joy, this love of this quite pop aesthetic that you had in places like Dragon Mart, like the malls, and those were the places of gathering as teens. Those were the places that were the most familiar, and so I think that's a great point, because that's where teens hang out. I mean, I never, you know, I personally, I could never fundamentally relate to that, but that whole geography and social network of the malls and what happens there definitely can't be underestimated there either.
I would like to add on malls. I think it's important, I mean, rather interesting to see now also malls becoming places for culture, and even, you know, Medina Jumeirah has this theater now, and then Dubai Mall, I think, will soon be hosting this sort of interactive digital space that is opening soon. So I guess we also go through the transformation of these spaces, acknowledging their importance as public spaces as well, I guess, right?
Just a few more examples. Right, to have indoor spaces. I believe every emirate has its own preservation program. And speaking of Abu Dhabi, I mentioned about those 64 sites. One of them is Officers Club, and I think recently it has seen tremendous change. So it's home to one of our, good friends. There's a design studio where Slash, and it's, you know, the umbrella, and it is a building, if you're familiar, it's this vast, large kind of a pavilion, you know. It's ready-made, so it's good for modular structures. I think the roof is already there. And there are other examples which come to mind. On the way between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's a Al Raha Hospital. Yeah, if you trace that building, right, which I believe was introduced by, I think, Pan Emirates Consult sometimes in 70s. It started, I believe, as a market. Yeah, it's a beautiful sustaining circular structure. There are structures, we spoke of brutalism, structures like this in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, or somewhere else. There's just few examples, really, that there's abundance of already built spaces, and I think there are many great minds thinking now about how to put them into the right use.
Okay, thank you very much for the discussion. It was very interesting to listen to all of you and like the completely different perspectives, and you bring out a lot of problematics. But I found one thing that, one of you said, I think it was Tala who said, people that are driving by, they actually don't stop, and obviously they shouldn't be looking on the side of the street because then they get into an accident. So it's a good thing they don't see the art. But I was wondering whether, and I don't know if it's done here, and I haven't seen it, whether people use the facades of these tall glass boring buildings, sorry for anybody who's ever built something like that. They tend to become, like almost a texture, because there's so many of them. They are similar, but they are also glass, and they have very kind of like plain facades in some ways. Whether that is something to explore as a kind of canvas for public art, not too exciting so that people don't get into accidents while they're driving, but somehow that they can be, activated and used, because...
If I jump on it, there's one person here in the UAE, we take a lot of inspiration from. I think he's one of editors of National Geographic, but also he has this amazing passion project, actually many projects for typologies, Hussein Al-Musawi. He's been meticulously taking photos of amazing facades, and short point was that, and before we saw some of this, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with his work. I think he's represented by Gulf Photo Plus and others. Just once we started paying attention, the point was that many of those facades themselves are absolutely unique and without additional decoration, with all respect to some members of ours who are into murals. So yes, many of them are just absolutely amazing the way they are, and it just requires a bit of attention, but not when driving, just to look up and check them out.
I mean, it's interesting that you bring up this issue of these facades, because they're so shiny that they feel they resist any, everything becomes so flat and shiny that how do it's sort of like it's constantly a mirror that reflects back, and how do you engage with it? So I guess I would say two things. One, it's actually for that comment where people mention longer arcs of history. I think people shouldn't forget that even, I guess that's what that project was trying to document all those different eras of those facades. But it's also, for me, it's also, I think with each new shiny facade, there's also a huge comms machine that comes with it, that kind of, where you kind of forget the layers on the ground. So that's where actually, for example, another very interesting artist who brought a very critical narrative to that, called Sofia Al-Maria, who starts describing, talking about Gulf futurism, what happens when the facades crack. And there is this phenomenon with the heat, with these things. What happens when that very shiny, flat facade cracks? And what does it say about what's really happening on the inside that was left inaccessible or on the ground? So, for sure, you could use it as a canvas, but I also like the provocation of what an artist like Sofia Al-Maria brings in her practice of saying, well, what happens? And it does happen, it's not common, of course, but when that facade cracks, what's been really going on behind the facade or on the ground. So I do think it's also easy to kind of, this self-perpetuating narrative that everything is new, whereas actually there are many layers that sort of build up over that are already here on the ground.
Yeah, but also, like you were talking about your public art kind of educating the public, but it's also when you look at the pieces that are in this biennial, I mean, a lot of the good pieces, like the one you mentioned, but there's other ones also where it's actually the city itself and the spaces that's what's creating the art and what's kind of a response to it. So if you have a city and you feel it's problematic that there's only large buildings and or at least people don't walk, then why not use that built environment as a kind of source of inspiration to create artwork that is a conversation with the public and the culture, even though it's not going back to, you know, the heritage and the old-fashioned, the reimagined history, sort of like the rebuilding of something that was never there, but kind of we think it should have been there.
It's a nice idea. We can explore on it.
Maybe like last question to ask. Okay, then conclusion, and we are done for today.
I guess we are. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Yes, so we have like a 20 minutes of the last traces of networking here in the library, and then those who want and have strength are very welcome to join us to the In Loco gallery for after party, like for a small closing remark, like the closing after party.
Very friendly remarks, yeah. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you for
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. It was amazing having you all together today.
Thank you.
Oh.